Hey guys, thought I would do another update video to let you guys know what I'm working on at the moment. I haven't really got too much new gameplay stuff to show. It's pretty much for the last week all been about optimizing the engine, getting in a point where it runs really nicely on my PC because I've got a pretty good PC, so I want it to be way over 60 on my setup, and I've kind of got there now after a week of optimizing. So I thought I'd go through some of the things that I've been working on in regards to that. So one of the main things I've integrated into the engine now is anti-portals, and I will show you what they are and how they work. So if I turn these on, these white volumes you see here are anti-portals, and basically what they do is they hide any geometry that's behind them. So what you do is you put them inside big bits of geometry and they will cull everything behind them. So if I go up here, you can see as I move around here, it's removing all the stuff that fits inside that white volume. Because obviously if we're inside this little inside area here and we're behind this wall here, then we can't see anything over there. So we can put this big anti-portal here and get rid of all that geometry on the CPU really quickly. So I've got, you know, one inside this big hill, and there's a few inside this hill here, and some inside the rocks, etc. And they work really nicely for getting rid of geometry. They only work for geometry that gets rendered from the camera's perspective at the moment. From the shadow perspective, they also go through the same system, but I also want to actually get rid of the shadows in the render pass where we do all the normal rendering as well. That would save a lot, but it's a little bit tricky to do in there. But yeah, I'm aiming to do something like that. Another thing I've been working on is how I set constants in shaders. So when I upload textures or set float constants or vector constants or whatever, I was always previously doing it by a string, sending that to the FX system and letting it convert to a actual constant address. But this is pretty damn slow. I'm not really sure how DirectX does it internally, but I'm guessing it has some hash map for the strings or something. But either way, passing the strings to it is always going to be slow regardless of how it's implemented. So I've got a couple of neat ways of setting shader constants now. One of them is that for each shader I cache a handle for some of the particularly common shader constants, so things like the world matrix, which is basically set in almost every single shader, diffuse texture, normal map, view projection matrices, width and height, those kind of things. So whenever I want to set one of those, I've just got an enum basically, which I use instead of a string. And the other method I've got for doing it is kind of the inverse really. For each parameter, sorry, I have a separate class, and that class has the string of the constant I want to set, and it stores the handles of each effect you use for it. So if I use it to set in a basic normal mapping shader or something, it will cache the handle that string uses in that shader. So that's much quicker to look up in because it doesn't actually have to use the string after it's cached it, which is really nice. Another thing I've been working on is how the water calculates its normals, which was really slow before because I would have to calculate 4 points, which was pretty expensive because I've got a really horribly unoptimized ton of cos waves on top of each other for the water, so it's pretty slow. I will turn this off and I will show you guys what looks like it's a bit higher. It looks right to me. I'm now calculating it from the derivatives of the cos waves instead of summing the heights together and calculating it in a somewhat more traditional way. I'm not entirely 100% sure the mass on it is correct. There's probably some issues with summing derivatives rather than heights, but it seems to give good results. So if it does that, I'm quite frankly happy with where it is, because that's all I really care about for this, because it's not actually used in any kind of physics or anything. So if it looks right, it's right enough. This, however, did mean I have to actually move my normal calculation for the dynamic water into a different pass. Fortunately, this is extremely cheap because I just do it in the same pass where I update the water, and I have all the texture sampled there I need anyway. So if I switch to that now, and this is the normal map for that, so I've thrown some barrels in the water you can't see, but you can see they're generating the normals here. If I switch that way, you can see them all there. So yeah, that works nicely. Another big thing I fixed was my SSAO actually had a pretty serious bug where it was causing some pretty unsightly artifacts which I'd kind of left alone because I had spent ages trying to work out what they were and I'd kind of given up, but I decided to take some time to actually really work out what was going on, and it turned out it wasn't actually using the correct texture I was passing it, which also meant it was meant it was a lot more expensive as well because it wasn't using the downsampled version, it was instead using the full-size version, which was thrashing the texture cache pretty badly. So if I switch to that, it's pretty much entirely artifact free now, and it's looking pretty good, and it's now generating in about just under 2 milliseconds, which I would still like to work on a bit, but it's in a decent-ish spot. So yep. Let's see here. Oh yes, God Rays I've also done a bit of work on. They are now done at 4 times downsampled rather than 2 times, and they use less samples, and I've got close-ish to the same result as I had before. I mean, it's not quite as good, but when it's a racing game and you're going around really quickly and you see it sort of like this, you're not going to notice. It's just not going to happen. In fact, I could probably downsample even further, but it's fairly cheap now anyway, so it's something that'll be an option, obviously. That's about it for the optimization I've done so far. I have some more ideas for the future I'd like to do. Like I said, I'd like to cull the shadows in the from the normal camera. There's some tricky things about that, as in the fact that shadows technically extend infinitely, which means that I can't actually really cull very much unless you're literally right up against an anti-portal, because they essentially extend infinitely far away from them anyway, so they would pretty much always be visible if you just assume they could actually go infinitely far. So I'd probably have to put some arbitrary cap on them or something, so that's something to think about. And another thing I'd like to do, also related to shadows, is cache shadow maps, which basically means that, so say this shadow from this block here onto the terrain, when I'm moving the camera around here, it's not actually moving, it's not doing anything. I could essentially just cache the whole shadow map from this point of view, and I only need to render things as they pop in and out of each shadow map, which is conceptually a very easy thing to understand why I don't need to render it again, but trying to actually get it smoothly in the pipeline is a different matter. So it's something I'll definitely be wanting to try and do though, because at the moment the shadows kind of almost take up half the draw calls. So if I could shave off like 50% of those, that's an enormous optimization I can make. And just to prevent this video from being too boring, if you've got this far, then congratulations. I'm going to spawn an enormous load of barrels, because thankfully with all my optimization it means that my rendering CPU time is pretty low now, so I can use all the rest of the CPU time for more fun stuff, which means I can spawn lots and lots of sort of physically calculated objects like these barrels here. So I mean, you'd never get this many in a game, but even with this many, it's not even having a remotely hard time keeping up with it. Yeah, you can spawn absolutely tons. I've spawned like 300 in the same spot, and it does absolutely nothing. In fact, I'm probably getting close to that many now. You just spawn a ridiculous amount, and yeah. The thing that's tricky about these is because they're constantly moving on the water, they never come to rest, and physics engines don't really like having to constantly calculate this many dynamic objects at once. What a physics engine really wants to do is they want objects which are in situations like this, where it's stopped, and now that object's just, well, it actually hasn't come to rest yet, but it will. Well, whenever it decides to come to a rest, yeah, there we go. It's basically not using any CPU time really at all. It's basically out of the equation as far as the physics simulations are concerned, whereas all these ones are constantly calculating, which is kind of a pain. But yeah, as you can see, it's handling it pretty nicely, even with this completely ridiculous number of them, so pretty happy with that. And I think that's about it. Now I have a bit of music to show you, which was composed by NTSCS and Griffin, and it's really fantastic, I think, and it's pretty much exactly the kind of style for the game I want, so I thought I'd play it for you guys and you can see what you think for yourself.